significant that happens. We are going to be talking about, is the Trump impeachment valid? I'm joined now from Washington by Ron Bonjean, a Republican strategist and former top spokesman to the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, Seth Berensweig, compliance and constitutional lawyer, and from Chicago, the Washington, D.C. bureau chief at the Chicago Sun-Times, Lynn Sweet. Welcome all. We are all wanting to know what happens. We'll stay across any significant developments in Washington. But to get the bigger picture, I want to hear from each of you first. Lynn first, about the charges that may be laid here and how this compares to the Clinton impeachment, which we both covered.
Here's the biggest difference, is that before the Clinton and Nixon impeachment, there had been months and months of investigations over the core charges. More than a year for Nixon, 4 years of investigations in all for President Clinton. So this is different. This is only the third impeachment. There's no one way of doing it. And in a sense, for this phase, the clock started ticking July 25th, and soon after the revealing from the whistleblower of a phone call. So there's no investigation that has happened beforehand. That's why this is different. That's why the House is calling witnesses now. They have to get the grounds established. The grounds more or less were established for Clinton and Nixon.
Seth, the White House says this is not only rushed, it is, in President Trump's words, a witch hunt. Do you think it is a valid process?
I believe that it's... Oh, I'm sorry.
Seth, yes.
I believe that... Yes. I believe that this is a valid process that has sound legal footing. That's one of the core issues of the day that's being presented. And I think it's important to look back on something important that happened last week. These same issues and these same legal arguments were presented to a federal judge here in the D.C. District Court in Washington, arguing that Congress was overstepping its authority, was acting in private, didn't have authority to issue subpoenas, and in fact needed, among other things, a full House vote of the House of Representatives. The chief judge here in Washington, D.C. rejected those arguments, discussing the inherent constitutional powers, and said that the House of Representatives was acting on sound legal footing. I think that it's even more so today. We are still a good deal away from seeing what the vote is with regard to what will be leading to alleged high crimes and misdemeanors. But from a process in terms of the steps that are taken, it certainly is valid. It's consistent with the law. It's consistent with the Constitution. And the underlying issues and crimes that are being presented generally fit within the provision of the Constitution that provides that authorization to trigger impeachment proceedings.
Ron Bonjean, do you agree that this could rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors?
Well, it feels very rushed to me, and I think a lot of Republicans and a lot of people across the country feel the same way. You know, there were polls just came out from the New York Times that say in key battleground states like Wisconsin and Florida, people don't agree with this. People don't agree with this process. The Democrats have yet to sell it, and I think this vote today is a very difficult one for them because it really puts a marker down. It's going to tell everyone, and it doesn't matter that this is to establish an impeachment inquiry. It's going to be defined as whether or not Democrats are voting for impeachment. This does feel rushed. This is also very political. I have no argument on the legal grounds here, but this absolutely feels political going into 2020. They're rushing it to try to get it done before we go into an election year because they are going to be accused of trying to electioneer to get President Trump out of office and to affect the election.
Lynn, I think I see your reaction there.
Well, the point is there's not really many alternatives at this point. I just want to stress that this just really started a few weeks ago with that whistleblower who really was just a tipster. So even if the parties were reversed, even if there wasn't an election coming up, and we've been in the midst of election season for months now, this is something that Trump has brought upon himself, this inquiry, because of what he said and what these other witnesses are saying. So even if it spills into 2020, there aren't a lot of alternatives here. The alternative would be what? You have months of hearings. I think sometimes Republicans and critics of the process make it seem as if there's an alternative, and that if there has been an alternative to nothing, The Republicans have not articulated it. So there's two things going on. The Republicans have not defended President Trump on substance, and this is just analysis from me, and the Republicans haven't suggested another process to be negotiated with the Democrats.
Seth, your legal opinion on how the White House is handling this, the tactics it's using or could use?
Well, I think that the White House strategies are somewhat limited. I think that ultimately what they're going to have to do is understand that there's just so much room that they can make with regard to attacking the process, because I think that the process it is a political process. I do agree with the statement that was noted by one of our colleagues on this segment a moment ago, but the constitutional framework is set in order to have it be a political process that has to go through both chambers of the United States Congress. The president is going to principally defend this along with trying to attack the credibility of the witnesses by saying that he has the inherent sole authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to be the sole lead of the executive branch, and that he has the ability and the discretion to make certain decisions. The problem with that decision is that that is not going to be necessarily a valid defense with regard to the felonies that are going to be alleged. But when you look at it from a political lens, it's going to be crucial for the Democrats to be able to explain at a very basic level, what are these issues, why is it a crime, and why does it matter? Why does Ukraine matter? Why do these laws matter? And that's the lens and the framework that everything has to go through in a very careful and meticulous process.
Ron Bonjean, you've had the ear of leaders in Washington. If you had the ear of President Trump right now, what would your advice be?
My advice would be to coordinate with the Republicans on Capitol Hill and to start talking about how this is smacks of politics, that they decided that this was the hat the hat that they were going to wear going into the 2020, that they were going to affect the election. Start getting away from the process. This vote is happening. Democrats are getting on record, and pivot and start talking about how this is political, how Democrats are trying to decapitate the President of the United States going into 2020 to fire up their liberal base. And that's what this is all about. Despite what the Democrats are saying regarding the legal process, there are many Democrats that aren't sold on this process yet. They don't know why they're voting on this. Americans across the country are not in agreement with this impeachment process. That's in key battleground states. Democrats must be very fearful about losing the House of Representatives in 2020. I was here during impeachment during the Clinton years. I worked for a congressman who was a moderate and undecided right up until the articles of impeachment, but that took such a long process. He had to study it. He had to think about it. He had to look at the evidence. This is very rushed, and it looks like a Hail Mary pass going into 2020. It's going to be bad news.
And just a final question to you, Ron, because I know that you'll have to leave us shortly. What about the Republicans' faith in President Trump? Do you think there is any chance that senators, when it gets to the Senate, will defect?
Highly unlikely. I think, though, we have to see what else comes out. I mean, we are just at the beginning of this investigation. But I think it's highly unlikely. I think that they're going to stick together because they see what many Americans see out there, which is that this is a very politicized process.
Ron, thank you. And I want to go back to Chicago now to take this out of Washington for a moment. Lynn Sweet, we've been hearing from Ron, well, this is politicized. Americans don't want this process. What are you hearing?
I am in a Democratic state, in a Democratic city. In the Midwest, where I am, is an island of anti-Trump Democrats. President Trump was in Chicago on Monday, actually, making his first visit as president. But there are two things that are more on the minds of Chicagoans today, and that is that a big teacher strike that's been going on for 2 weeks may be settled, and that it's Halloween and it's snowing unusually early. I say this to mean that there's a lot of things people focus on besides what may be seen here as a procedural vote, because people, if they're focusing, there has been an impeachment inquiry going on by the Democrats almost for weeks now since this whistleblower report surfaced, and witnesses have been deposed. So in a sense, this isn't, if you're important in terms of what's really happening. Today, tomorrow, yesterday, witnesses are coming in to be deposed. For the moment, except for